This video is brought to you by NordVPN, but more on that in a moment. How do you win a game of Magic the Gathering? Well, traditionally and most typically, you smash your opponent's face in. You send minions and monsters to reduce their starting loaf total a grand of 20 to 0. Or if you're a casual scrub, of course, you start at 40 in EDH, looking to put multiple people's life totals to 0, or to win. Throughout Magic history, there have been alternative win conditions put into Magic via new expansions, and today I'm going to talk about perhaps the most controversial one of all of these. This is Thassa Oracle, one of the strictest, most obvious examples of Powercreep that's not really discussed in that context. It is a card that affects every format it's touched bar standard. It is a card that shows a problem with the modern game's design in many ways, and I think can serve as a good cautionary tale moving forward. I'm going to talk about its history, its precursors, where it's used now, how people feel about it now, and how I feel about it now. But before we do, a quick message from this week's sponsor. You wouldn't work on a building site without wearing a hard hat, would you? And you wouldn't drive a car without a seatbelt either, right? So why are you browsing the internet in public without taking care and covering your ass? That's right, you heard me. You need to cover your ass. Look, as you start to go out more, maybe to work at a coffee shop in the morning, like I always dreamt of doing but never got around to, mainly because of a global pandemic, or maybe you're travelling more with work now as things are opening up, or even travelling for pleasure. You might want to protect your browsing by masking your IP through NordVPN and keeping your internet data safe through a wall of next generation encryption. I'm going to be finally flying out to events again. I'm going to Gibraltar for No Retreat Legends, a Warhammer 40k event in November, and I'm going to Vegas for the Magic event. So I'll be using NordVPN on my laptop when I'm travelling to keep me safe. And beyond that, you've heard this before, but I'm going to say it again because it's so fucking good. You can use NordVPN to enjoy content without borders and limitations based on geography. So for example, the incredible movie Mandy is pretty hard to find a place to stream it right now. It's only available on American servers of Shudder. So just click on the US server with NordVPN and boom, I've now got access to rewatching this modern classic. And if you haven't seen it yet, you should. It's real good. And that's just one example of content that is region locked by service providers that NordVPN allows you to circumvent. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description below and get a huge discount on a 2-year plan and 1 month of NordVPN free as well. And at the same time, you're supporting the channel and the show. Alternative win condition cards can vary wildly. We have the old school Commander Band Coalition Victory to more modern and popular cards like Approach of the Second Sun. And by popular, I mean kinda hated. If you are a big fan of Approach of the Second Sun, it means you're probably a fucking psychopath. Honestly, alternative win condition cards aren't often seen as the darlings of the player base. There are things like Door to Nothingness, which is cool and all, but I think besides a few outliers like Door, alternative win conditions aren't seen or thought of very fondly. Think of Felidar Sovereign, for example. A card like this is more likely to be met with frustration and audible groans than excitement. Even cards like Azor's Executioners and other win conditions that aren't good are kind of seen as middling. No one's excited by them. To me, it seems that alternative win condition cards are either very good and therefore a problem, or they're not very good and no one cares. One of the most playable, if not the most playable alternative win condition card in multiple formats has been Laboratory Maniac, the Innistrad set card that depicts a mad scientist doing things that other people won't to get what he needs, playing with thunder and lightning. In Magic the Gathering, there is an alternative loss condition that is built into the mechanics of the game. It's not a new thing introduced by a new game piece. It's where, if you were to take a draw from your deck via an effect or the first card you draw in the turn, and that card cannot be drawn because the deck is empty, you lose the game. What this means is that games have a finite amount of time that you hardly ever get to, but you have to be aware of. You can't draw too many cards and spin your wheels as a control deck. You can attack your opponent's resource of their library and mill them, which is the term for putting cards from library to graveyard, and get rid of all their cards and make them lose like mill archetypes do. Or self-mill can be a thing where you're living life on the edge. It's dangerous. Innistrad had a self-mill theme. The idea that you're going to mill yourself to get a payoff. And in Limited especially, that's difficult because you only have a 40-card deck. Laboratory Maniac was originally a self-mill payoff. In a set full of self-mill, he was strong, both in Limited and, I guess, was put there as a card that could be played in Standard, although as far as I understand it, he wasn't much of a house there. I don't remember anyone playing him when I played Standard at the time. He's one of those cards that I guess people would have built around or tried to force, and it wasn't that good. However, drawing your whole deck or putting it into your graveyard or exile is a lot easier in the deeper, richer, more powerful formats. that Magic has, I say formats of old then. Not of old, they're still around. Legacy, Modern, Vintage, CEDH. Laboratory Maniac has seen play in Doomsday, in ad nauseum variants that I've used him too, some versions of Eggs over the years, Grishol brand variants. There are many decks that have used Laboratory Maniac over the years to be a win con that doesn't interact with your opponent. He is a super efficient 3-mana win condition. I say 3 mana. It's not 3 mana on its own, obviously you've got to work for it. But he's 3 mana himself, and he doesn't involve you interacting in any way. You don't need to go to combat. It doesn't care if your opponent is hexproof thanks to a ley line or similar. Laboratory Maniac essentially allows you to goldfish, to play solitaire, to wank yourself to completion with no regard, complete disregard for what the other person at the table is doing. If we fast forward 8 years, we got a variant of Labman, which was the super interesting Jace Wielder of Mysteries. It was a more color intensive, higher cost in mana, and functioned quite differently for being a Planeswalker. It had the same static line of text that allowed it to pop off and for you to win with no cards in your library, but it also had its own activated abilities which self-synergized with this line of text, and it came with all the pros and cons of it being a Planeswalker instead of a creature. It not being a creature means you can't tutor for it with the same effects that you would be able to with Labman. It can't be corded for one off the top of my head. It can't be cast off of a Cavern of Souls uncounterable. It can't attack in a weird situation where you gotta beat down. But it's more resilient to removal. It's a Planeswalker after all. Whilst it can take burn, it starts on 4 loyalty and does tick up as well, so it doesn't die to the same burn spells, and there are less removal spells for Planeswalkers in the game than there are for creatures. That's just a matter of fact. Jace is a perfectly reasonable Magic card, a variant on an established and existing and much loved card, albeit with a load of missing flavour. Like, why does Jace win the game if he digs to the bottom of his memory? Is this a JRPG where amnesia and trying to remember your past is your only defining character trait or narrative plot point? Jace was one of many Planeswalkers in a sea of walkers. War of the Spark brought many, many Planeswalkers. I didn't write down how many in my notes. I think it's more than 30. Every booster pack had one. They were uncommon, rare, and mythic. And the funny thing is, you might think an alternate WinCon Jace Planeswalker might be obnoxious, but it doesn't even make the top 5. It might not even make the top 10 of Planeswalkers that were problems or just a pain in the arse to play against from that set. War of the Spark, in which Jace was in, and Modern Horizons 1 marked the beginning of a new era of Magic design, of fire design, a term that they came up with that I can't be bothered to explain here. Essentially, things were getting more and more pushed. There was more and more text on cards, and things were more and more exciting, which meant we were seeing power creep. Power creep as a term is used to describe the ongoing increase in power level of new releases and game pieces within a game system. It is often a result of trying to appeal to either newer players or keep older players enfranchised and interested, although it can often do the exact opposite because it will make older game pieces and older parts of the system obsolete, unfun, or just unplayable because they aren't good enough. They're left behind in power level. We had fixed versions of older legacy cards that ended up being dumb and pushed and format warping. We saw mythic rares get pushed to the fucking moon in terms of what they were allowed to do. And we saw some of the most ludicrously batshit designs we've ever seen. Things that after only a moment of playing with make you say, huh, this card sure does feel broken. And in that period of fire design, we got the new Laboratory Maniac. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, ain't got shit on her son. Thoracle, or Thassa Oracle, is a 2-blue mana 1/3 merfolk wizard. When Thassa Oracle enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your devotion to blue. Put up to 1 of them on top of your library and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If X is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your library, you win the game. In essence, when she enters the battlefield, she triggers and you look at the top 2, because she has 2 blue devotion, cards of your library, and if you have 2 or fewer cards in your library, you win the game as part of that resolution. As an introduction to Thoracle, before I talk about how I feel about it, here is Benjamin Wheeler on the subject.
I struggle to find who this card is for, because I more so hate that it exists, blockading me from, competitively playing other 2-part combos, and nobody seems to really love it, so it just kind of sits there in the aether, being boring, yet being the only option, or at the very least, the best option.
Laboratory Maniac was on the fringes of being one of the best options possible for solitary wankery and combo. To summarise Wheeler's sentiment of Thoracle, why would you not play it. But what made Thoracle so homogenizing for combo decks in CEDH, other Highlander variants, and older formats where Labman saw play? Well, there's a few reasons, really. Firstly, she doesn't require you to have any other cards to win. With Laboratory Maniac, you are often, in Doomsday piles for instance, using Street Wraith or Edge of Autumn or a similar free card draw spell to draw another card and win off the Labman's ability. Thoracle just says you win right now if your opponent can't stop it. What this also means, because there's a trigger inherent to the Thoracle, is that Laboratory Maniac can be killed with the card draw on the stack. If you can't protect yourself and someone bolts your Laboratory Maniac or your Edge of Autumn or Street Wraith on the stack, it dies, and then you draw a card, can't, and you lose. There's a fairness to Laboratory Maniac that is missing from Thassa Oracle entirely, and it's probably the most egregious problem with Thassa Oracle. In addition to this, we need to explain how this works if you were to remove Thassa Oracle. Some people do think, well, you know, it checks devotion, right? So if your devotion is 0, you don't get anything. Well, no. You don't look at any cards if you kill her. So if you kill her before the trigger resolves, let it resolve. Devotion is 0, look at 0 cards, and if you have 0 cards in your library, which is equal to the number of cards you looked at, you win. So killing her if they've got 1 card left in the library is good. Killing her if there's no cards left in the library does absolutely nothing, where it would with Laboratory Maniac. Of course, you can force your opponent to draw a card with this trigger on the stack, but you can do that with Laboratory Maniac anyway, so it's not really a downside of Thoracle, it's just a downside of this combo. It's important to note that there are a few fringe decks that continue to play Laboratory Maniac after the printing of Thassa's Oracle. When Simian Spirit Guide was legal in Modern, there is a Neoform deck that used Neoform to jump an Allosaurus right into Grizzlebrand, and you drew your whole deck. You pitch Nourish and Shoals, and it's a whole thing. There'll be a video in the I button, wherever that is, of me playing that deck. I loved that deck when it was legal. And you played Labman because you drew a lot of cards, made mana, played Labman and drew more cards. It allowed you to overdraw into the win. There was fringe cases where Labman was better due to the fact that you could draw cards after you'd cast it, where Thoracle is useless on board. Thoracle, once it's on board, trigger resolves and you haven't won, doesn't do anything, while Labman still presents the threat of winning. So there's a small fringe case where Labman is better. Don't forget that Thassa's Oracle, though, is also cheaper at 2 mana instead of 3, and has a better defensive stat line to boot, surviving shocks, sudden impacts, and 2 counters from a jit. Not that that is ever really relevant that you're going to be jitting this thing, but it is a good point that for some reason Thassa's Oracle is just better in these categories too. And I have to, really stress this. The drop from 3 mana to 2 mana in Legacy, in CEDH, in those kind of powerful, tight formats, is huge. And the funniest bit of all this, despite all the power creep, is the flavour and the theme. Both Labman and Thoracle are wizards, and I wonder if this is a throwback reference to Labman by those designing Thassa's Oracle. Laboratory Maniac is someone who is diving into the places that no one else wants to go. The reduction of your library to 0 is often framed as madness or fraying sanity, and Laboratory Maniac is willing to go to the fringes of what is acceptable within society, like a real Laboratory Maniac would, like a mad scientist. And it makes sense that them going to the bottom of your deck and get rid of it all will win the game. Laboratory Maniac is a powerful piece of top-down design. It is incredibly flavorful. Meanwhile, Thassa's Oracle can look into the future to see what you might draw. That makes sense from an Oracle perspective, but why does she win the fucking game? What is in that pearl that's allowing her to win the fucking game? If anything, the win a game clause feels a bit out of place, honestly. It makes me wonder if it was added much later in design than the original card had. So outside of fringe Grizzlebrand decks in Modern, every combo deck able to draw its library or exile its library or dump its library was resorting to Thassa's Oracle. This is the Doomsday decks in Legacy. This is the Inverter combo deck prior to Inverter being banned in Pioneer, for Thoracle's sins I might add. Then we have Thoracle in Historic with Tainted Pact that got printed into it inexplicably, which got Thoracle banned. Then we have multitudes of these variants, like multiple variants of Thoracle decks in CEDH as well. It is basically the go-to win condition that you expect at a CEDH table from any deck playing blue.
Hi, my name's Callahan and I'm from the Mind Sculptors. We are a CEDH podcast that likes to explore new ideas in the CEDH metagame, as well as help players improve within the community. I play with and against Thassa's Oracle often in CEDH games, whether that is streaming or in CEDH leagues and tournaments. The deck that I play it the most often in is probably my Thassias Timnalist. When Thassa's Oracle got printed, we all immediately knew it was a problem because it simplified the Flash Hulk lines to such a degree that there was really no reason to play anything else. The issue is, even without Flash, the card is still crazy good, Assembling Thor plus one of the Forbidden Tutors is incredibly easy to do, especially when compared to the alternatives of Labman and Lab Jace.
So why do I see this card as a mistake, and one of the bigger mistakes Wizards have made lately? And they've made a lot of design mistakes, right? And what I do want to just add at this point, at this juncture, is that a lot of what they design in Magic ends up being very, very good. From world design and set design to aesthetics and art direction. Like, most Magic cards are fucking great. It's just funny that we focus on the negatives, but we focus on the ones that damage our play experience. We focus on the ones that everyone's talking about. It's difficult to draw that focus away. It's why I make the lore videos. It's why I talked about folk and folk horror and the feeling of that going into Innistrad. I do want to be a content creator that props up the good stuff in the game, as well as taking introspective or quite critical views of what Wizards have done with design. But with all that said, it's very hard not to observe mistakes being made rather constantly with current design. And I wish we're out of fire design, but it feels like we're not. Although the last couple of sets haven't been quite this way. Ragavan, Murktide region, all this shit we're seeing from Modern Horizons 2. A set that I love, by the way. But we see it all just dominating older formats. It does make you think, are we out of the woods yet? Oracle is very representative of this. Not only is it something that is homogenizing combo decks because it's the cheapest and easiest way to get a 2-card combo in blue of all colors, normally coupled with black, but it's a cheaper, more efficient, easier to cast because it's cheaper. The cheapness is the real crux of the matter here. Version of an older win con that was perfectly reasonable. Like, no one was ever really tilted by Labman unless they were a fucking scrub. And it's funny, right? Because it's double blue pipped. You'd think that'd be a huge downside. You'd think that it being more color restrictive, kind of like Jace World of Mysteries was, would make it rougher. And it would make it rougher in a cube draft where your fixing's not great. But in the Eternal formats where everyone's got like the best fixing in the world, being double blue is a very small barrier for entry. We saw this with things like Goblin Chain Whirler as well in Standard recently, I say recently, a couple of years ago now, but where it being triple red was meant to be restrictive, but when the mana bases are good, it's not much of a restriction. And on top of that, double blue, like the only color combo where I think it would be even easier to win with it would probably be double black, because it often combos with your consultations and your doomsdays and your stuff like that, your dark ritual decks, right? But double blue, where it's in the same colors as the best card selection and the best permission in all of Magic, the same colors as Brainstorm, Force of Will, and Daze, hardly a downside now, is it? I do like a world where I think double red would be fine too, because you can play in a lot of ritual decks that want to storm off or do combo things. But like, imagine a double green one or a double white one. It wouldn't make mechanical sense. I'm not saying this should be part of white or green's color identity, although I can imagine green getting a card like this for some reason. But I'm just saying that it would be funny to see it mono white because it would be a lot weaker. It'd still be playable. It'd probably still see almost the same amount of play, but it'd definitely be a weaker Magic card for being double white. And then there's this interesting thing as well, that Thassa Oracle is a homogenizing card in terms of giving different combo decks the same finish. Where I argued this for Walking Blister, again a card that I'll link in the description below, a video I'll link in the description below and the cards of this video, where I talked about how colorless, powerful options that are Powercreep usually, and the best at what they do in Standard and other formats will homogenize those formats. So we saw this in Standard with like Battle Skulls, Wormcoil Engines, and definitely Smuggler's Copter being the best at what they do and fitting into every deck, or that slot in that deck if that slot's available. And then we saw it again with Walking Ballista, a colorless bit player that is good in multiple archetypes because it's an artifact, shooty gun machine that's also an infinite mana outlet that can also be an infinitely big creature as well as a direct damage source. Like, it ticks every box whilst being colorless. So it's funny that Thassa Oracle is like the antithesis or the counter argument to this idea that we need to be careful about colorless. But I guess my argument or defense of that would be that blue and to an extent black, and maybe green in some formats, are essentially colorless at that point because they can do anything they want and have the best options anyway. They're just the best thing to play. I'll close out the video on this observation. I think Laboratory Maniac is an incredible Magic card. It's interesting on multiple planes. It created new archetypes whilst being on theme and flavorful. I think it's a resounding success in game design, and whoever created this, they deserve the praise. Because Laboratory Maniac, it's got a lasting legacy, as well as being a theme and flavorful part of the Innistrad block. Thassa Oracle, on the other hand, represents a drift from this platonic ideal of a magic card almost. And to use a more dramatic term, perhaps a fall from that. It's thematically less appropriate, it's muddled, it's confusing. It's more efficient for the sake of being more efficient, and it has 10 times the words on it as well, meaning it's less elegant, it's clunkier. Honestly, if I remember correctly, the first couple times I read this card, I wasn't even fucking sure what it did, other than it felt like there was a Labman effect in there. Ultimately, I don't want to paraphrase Benjamin Wheeler too much, but who wanted this? Who was this for, other than, I guess, very spiky combo players? That's it. That's my opinion and my thoughts and my meditations on the existence of Thassa's Oracle within Magic the Gathering. A big shout out and thank you to NordVPN for continuing to sponsor videos on this channel to allow me to do what I do and buy these lights and buy these lovely lenses. If you enjoyed the video, smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to get involved with the conversation around things like this, my Discord is the best place to do it. There's a link in the description below to my Patreon where you get this. This is an altar sleeve. This is the October one. Get involved in the next 5 to 6 days to get a free altar sleeve as part of the Patreon sign up. I've been Vince, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Did I miss something important? Do you just disagree with me? Always willing to listen. I'll see you soon. Ta-ta for now.